Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Hiba, and here on my channel I discuss recent missing person cases. If you're into that type of content, go ahead and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Today I'd like to talk about Ella Goodie. Ella is a 32-year-old woman from Lafayette, Louisiana. She's been missing since March 9th, 2022. This case is very troubling and honestly should be headline news. It sort of reminds me of the Gabby Petito Brian Laundrie case. More than one state is involved, and the FBI and US Marshals are also assisting. However, unlike Gabby's case, there isn't a manhunt for the person potentially involved. But before we get into that, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Ella. Like I said, Ella is 32 years old. Prior to her disappearance, Ella had worked as a driver for Lyft. I'm sure you all know what that is, but just in case you don't, it's basically like a modern taxi service. You can request a ride through the app and then somebody will come pick you up and take you to where you need to go. Drivers are considered independent contractors, which means that they're responsible for setting their own schedules and also responsible for healthcare and so on. At the time of her disappearance, Ella was not actively driving for Lyft. Some sources state that she had been suspended as a driver, but I'm not sure how accurate that is. Regardless, she wasn't driving for the company at the time of this incident. However, she obviously still had to pay her bills and provide for her family, so she started offering her own ride services. This is something that some individuals opt to do. It's sort of like cutting out the middleman, which is Uber or Lyft. For example, say you request a ride through Uber and Lyft and your ride comes out to $15. The driver receives a portion of your payment and the rest goes to the platform, whether it's Uber or Lyft or whatever for the service they're providing. Instead of doing that, a driver may independently offer to take you on the same ride for $12 in cash. In this case, there is no Uber or Lyft and the driver receives the full payment, and you also save money. Essentially, cutting out the platform makes it cheaper for riders and also more profitable for drivers. People might advertise rides or their services through Facebook or groups, or even through customers that they potentially drove through Lyft or Uber at one point. However, without the third-party platform, there are several safety concerns. For one, there isn't really a record of the trip. Rideshare services like Lyft and Uber track their drivers and where they're going. Obviously, that isn't the case when somebody is doing this independently. There's also questions about insurance in case of an accident. Would a passenger be covered? Unlike with Lyft and Uber, there really isn't a guarantee. For these reasons, many people choose to use these ride-sharing platforms, even if it is a little bit more expensive. Despite these concerns though, some riders and drivers will still arrange a cash trip off of the app. In fact, some individuals prefer cash rides. Here are some comments I found regarding the matter.
The first comment reads, "Heck yeah, cash is king. If Uber and Lyft were not stealing tips, I'm all for it and I do it all the time and I know many who do it." The second comment says, "Heck yeah, I'd rather pay cash to the drivers. I feel bad for them not making much money." These next comments say, "I do it all the time with PayPal. My car, my rules." Someone responded that Uber was $85 and paying cash was $20 cheaper.
So like I said, this is what Ella was doing at the time of her disappearance. She was providing her own driving services. On the day of her disappearance, Ella told her family that she would be driving somebody to Houston. The drive to Houston from Lafayette is approximately 3.5 hours. Before heading out, she told her daughters that she would be back before they returned home from school. As we know though, that didn't happen and Ella hasn't been seen or heard from since. The person Ella was giving a ride to is a man named Brandon Francisco. I've seen some people state that she had given him rides in the past, so it's possible that this isn't the first time that they met or the first time they were in a car together. However, I'm not sure how accurate that is. According to Ella's father, Brandon asked her to take him to Houston, and the two agreed that he would pay her for the ride. I'm not sure how much he agreed to pay her, however, keep in mind that this trip is 3.5 hours one way. After Ella never made it home, she was reported missing. Her 2012 Audi Q5 is also missing. It has Texas license plates reading NRN 6551. Police have been able to verify that Ella's car was on I-10 heading towards Houston on the morning of March 9th. Approximately 12 hours later, her vehicle re-entered Louisiana and was headed back to Lafayette. However, it didn't stay in Louisiana for long. The very next day, the car was tracked going back to Texas, but this time north of Dallas. This can be a little confusing, so I'm going to summarize the vehicle's movements. On March 9th, Ella's car headed towards Houston, Texas, as intended to drop off Brandon. 12 hours later, the car re-entered Louisiana. Logically, this should have been Ella coming back from dropping Brandon off. However, that trip should have taken 6 to 7 hours, but the car didn't re-enter for 12 hours. After re-entering Louisiana, the car went back into Texas towards Dallas. If you recall, Brandon was supposed to be dropped off in Houston. Houston is about 3.5 hours away from Dallas, where the car was last traced to, and that's about 6 hours away from Lafayette. If we do the math, it takes 3.5 hours to Houston and then 3.5 hours back, which equals 7 hours. Then the trip back to Dallas would have been an additional 6 to 7 hours. This means that someone had driven over 13 hours in that period of time. Ella told her daughters that she would be back by the end of the day. That means that she didn't plan on being away for a long time. So what happened? Well, we know that the last person to see Ella was Brandon. So let's talk a little bit more about him. Brandon is an extremely violent person, and he has a long rap sheet to show for it. In fact, the very day that he asked Ella to take him to Houston, he was scheduled to have a court hearing. Obviously, he didn't show up, so there is an active warrant for his arrest. The court hearing was regarding a 2018 shooting. Brandon was charged with attempted first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. He pleaded not guilty to all of the charges. He was only in jail for about 6 months before posting bail. I don't understand why this man was released at all. It's not like he was facing drug charges or theft charges or something like that. This is the second case that I've talked about within the last month where someone was released while awaiting murder charges. I don't understand how our justice system repeatedly allows this, especially when there are people still locked up for petty drugs. The 2018 shooting isn't the only criminal incident that Brandon has allegedly been involved in. He is a registered sex offender for a crime involving a child. When he was 21, this man tried to kill his former girlfriend, who was 17 at the time. He broke into her home while she was sleeping and stabbed her repeatedly. All this time, her 2.5-year-old daughter was in the bed with her. There isn't much out there about this incident, but another creator, Ickmel, did share a newspaper clipping. I will include that here. It reads, "A teenage mother has been left with serious injuries after she was attacked in her apartment on Tunica Drive in Marksville recently. Tatiana Jacobs, an African-American female, age 17, was residing at the Tunic Estate Apartments when the incident occurred on August 4th. Jacobs' boyfriend, Brandon Francisco, allegedly broke into the home in the early morning hours on Saturday, August 4th. It then goes on to talk about the fact that her 2.5-year-old daughter was in bed with her during this attack. So clearly, this man has no regard for human life or anyone but himself. Considering Brandon's violent past and the fact that he was the last person to be with Ella, it makes sense to conclude that he could potentially be involved with her disappearance. It's possible that something spontaneous happened while on the trip to Houston, which resulted in Ella being hurt and Brandon driving the vehicle. Maybe Brandon refused to pay her and there was some sort of altercation over this. It's also possible that Brandon planned something and set her up. Maybe he wanted her car, so he asked her for a ride and then did something along the way or once they arrived. We know that Brandon skipped his hearing and is now running from the law. Is it possible that he wanted to take her car? If not to drive, potentially to sell. Ella does drive a luxury vehicle. According to Kelley Blue Book, the manufacturer's suggested retail price is around $36,000. Maybe Brandon sold it off before a description of the vehicle was released. Of course, it's also possible that the vehicle was just ditched somewhere. Ultimately, anything here is really possible since the car is still missing. Ella's phone last pinged in a town called Iowa, not the state, but a town in Louisiana. This town is between Lafayette and both Houston and Dallas, where we know her car was last seen. Unfortunately, we don't know what time the phone pinged, so it could have been on the way to Houston or on the way to Dallas the next morning. Since that is the last ping, it's possible that someone turned off the phone, that the battery died, or that it was discarded, potentially thrown out a window or something. Like I mentioned earlier, some sources state that Ella and Brandon knew one another and that she had given him rides before this trip. Their relationship and whether they knew one another isn't really clear. Is it possible that Ella did know that he had a hearing and that she was helping him leave town? Maybe, but regardless, it's clear that she intended to come home. She told her kids that she would be back before the day ended, so I don't think that she's missing of her own accord. Unfortunately, there are many risks when giving someone a ride, especially for female drivers, and especially if it's off the books or not on a platform. There's no record of the trip, no one knows who you're with or where you're going. This is just one reason why I always recommend sharing your location with at least one person, whether it be a friend or family or whoever, as long as it's someone you trust. In that case, someone knows where you are should anything happen. But even when rides are given through Uber and Lyft, there are safety concerns and dangerous situations do arise. Even if a photo and name is provided, you don't know the person getting into your vehicle. I've personally spoken to 3 Uber or Lyft drivers that have experienced a passenger becoming violent. 2 of these individuals are women and 1 is a man. They told me stories about being threatened, having weapons pulled on them, being robbed, and so on. One of these drivers told me that she always carries her firearm, even though it's prohibited by Uber. She explained that she carries for safety reasons, seeing as she can be easily overtaken at 5 feet tall and 100 pounds. Thankfully, she's never been in a situation where she's had to use it. Do any of you drive for Uber or Lyft or know anyone that does? If so, have they had any experiences like this? Let me know in the comments below. Ella is still missing along with her phone and her vehicle. My heart breaks for her family, particularly her 2 daughters. At 13 and 14, they really need their mom there. At any age, really. The community is coming together and trying to put some searches together. However, this has been really difficult since there isn't really a designated area to narrow in on. I know that a group is getting together to put up flyers in Dallas on March 26th, so this Saturday. I will include the flyer for that here. There's also a Facebook group, so be sure to join, especially if you're in the area and want to help with searches. If you're not, you can still help by sharing Ella's story. Ella is 5'3" and weighs 168 pounds. She was last seen wearing a denim jacket with blue pants. If you have any information, please call the number in the description below. Thank you so much for sticking with me till the end. I really appreciate it. Be sure to share Ella's story, and I'll see you in my next one.